Beneath the rubble of history lie corridors no map dares chart, vaults of steel and silence where the air still smells of oil and blood. In these shadows, truth was chained, names erased, and machines dismantled before the ink of surrender had dried. What remains are fragments, coded whispers, blurred photographs, and files sealed so tightly that even time itself seems afraid to touch them. At 3:12 hours on April 28, 1945, 2 days before Adolf Hitler's suicide, a 6-vehicle convoy departed the Reich Chancellery compound under a false Red Cross flag. Soviet 1st Belarusian front units were less than 15 kilometers away, and Allied air patrols had intensified over northern Germany. The column consisted of 3 cargo trucks, 2 Opel Blitz escort lorries, and a lead Horch staff car, all unmarked except for hastily painted medical insignia. According to fragmentary Wehrmacht transport orders recovered decades later from the Bundesarchiv, catalogued under misfiled logistics requisitions, reference BRHMA/42-8913, the convoy's manifest listed only medical and relief goods. Yet the documents bore the cipher seal of the Heereswaffenamt, the Army Weapons Office, an incongruity that has puzzled archivists for years. Intercepted Soviet signals, declassified by the GRU in 1991, paint a more complex picture. One intercepted field report from a forward reconnaissance element near Wernuchen noted armored escort, non-combat livery, erratic routing patterns. The convoy avoided main arterial roads, instead weaving through secondary rural lanes toward the Harz Mountains. Its final confirmed sighting occurred near the village of Osterode am Harz at approximately 5:47 on the same day. After that, it simply vanishes from every known operational record. The Harz Mountains were not an arbitrary destination. In late April, this region became a focal point for desperate Nazi evacuations and rumored last stand preparations. The Mittelwerk facility at Nordhausen, where V-2 rockets were produced using forced labor, lay nearby. Intelligence officers from the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, later testified to a special weapons program, codenamed Projekt Morgenstern, still in testing stages when the Allies arrived. Surviving project notes suggest Morgenstern involved a directed energy discharge concept, an application of pulsed power far beyond the known electrical engineering of the era. Most of the documentation was allegedly destroyed in the final days, but enough survived to raise questions about the technology's maturity. In 1947, Captain James Whitford, formerly attached to the U.S. Army's Counterintelligence Corps, was interviewed in connection with the War Department's internal review of lost high-value enemy assets. His recorded statement, now available through FOIA releases, describes an unsanctioned post-war expedition into the Harz by mixed American and British personnel. They located the charred remains of 2 trucks along a narrow forestry track, vehicles matching the convoy's description. The cargo compartments had been gutted by intense fire, yet no human remains were present. In the ash, investigators recovered the twisted frames of heavy lead-lined storage crates, some still marked with hazard symbols consistent with the Reich's nuclear research inventory. Whitford's notes mention one other disturbing find: scraps of carbonized paper bearing complex engineering schematics and the partially legible phrase, Resonanz Frequenz Prototyp. Before the material could be fully examined, it was requisitioned by personnel identified only as belonging to Technical Intelligence Unit 12, a designation absent from any surviving Allied organizational charts. Soviet sources claim their own recovery operation occurred in the same region during the first week of May 1945, spearheaded by elements of the NKVD. In a 1968 memoir suppressed prior to publication, Colonel Andrei Vetrov described locating an abandoned tunnel system south of Klostl-Zellerfeld. Inside, his men found signs of hasty evacuation, discarded ration tins, smashed equipment, and deep scorch marks along the walls. Vetrov asserted the tunnel led to a collapsed chamber, where he glimpsed a massive cylindrical structure, sheared apart as if by internal detonation. No photographs accompanied his account, and Soviet archival searches in the 1990s found no corroborating imagery. Western analysts remain divided over whether Vetrov's description was a fabrication, a misinterpretation of conventional munitions damage, or a genuine glimpse of Morgenstern hardware. By the 1950s, scattered references to the convoy began appearing in classified NATO counterintelligence briefings. One internal West German report, dated March 12, 1954, warned of unresolved enemy material in Harz region, potential Soviet retrieval. The document recommended permanent monitoring of certain remote valleys, particularly near the Oder reservoir. Inexplicably, these recommendations were never formally acted upon, and the file was closed in 1956. The trail re-emerged in 1972 when a forestry worker near Altenau uncovered a buried steel canister during land clearing operations. The canister bore faint Waffenamt markings and contained brittle rolls of microfilm. Most frames were too degraded to recover, but several showed detailed cutaway diagrams of an apparatus labeled Feld generator TYPB. Accompanying annotations referenced frequency harmonics and field containment instability in technical German. Within 48 hours, West German intelligence seized the canister. The forestry worker was compensated for damaged property and cautioned to remain silent. Perhaps the most tantalizing lead came from a 1989 interview with retired U.S. Army Colonel Harold Beck, who served in Germany during the occupation. Beck recalled hearing from a fellow officer about a boxcar, sealed and unmarked, moved under night cover from Goslar to Bremerhaven in late '45. The contents, he claimed, were so sensitive that the escort detail included both American MPs and men wearing British uniforms with no unit insignia. The boxcar was loaded onto a Liberty ship bound for the East Coast. Its manifest classified. The ship's subsequent movements missing from port logs. What ultimately became of the Morgenstern convoy, if that's what it truly was, remains unresolved. Every attempt to piece together the route beyond Osterode runs into contradictions. Soviet patrol logs that contradict German civilian testimony, Allied aerial reconnaissance photos with conspicuous gaps, local police blotters mysteriously missing pages from late April 1945. The absence of bodies at the truck wreckage site is equally perplexing. Did the convoy's personnel escape with the cargo? Were they intercepted and executed without documentation? Or was the cargo itself dangerous enough to justify complete erasure of all witnesses? A final, chilling note comes from a marginal annotation found on an otherwise routine OSS after-action report from May 1945, housed in the U.S. National Archives under Record Group 226. Scrawled in pencil, likely by an intelligence officer, are the words, "Convoy confirmed Morgenstern. Do not pursue. Unstable." In the landscape of World War II's unresolved mysteries, the Harz convoy occupies a singular space, not for its combat significance, but for the precision with which its history has been excised. Somewhere between Berlin's final collapse and the shifting lines of the Cold War, an unmarked column of trucks carried away a fragment of knowledge that neither victors nor vanquished have seen fit to return to the record. On the night of February 4, 1952, Flight Lieutenant David Sayers of No. 85 Squadron, RAF, was conducting a routine radar calibration sortie out of RAF Kolteschall. At 23:41 hours, the AIMK-9 radar operator in the rear seat detected an inbound contact at 210 miles per hour, bearing northeast, altitude 8,000 feet. The track originated over open North Sea waters and was moving in an erratic, non-ballistic pattern. Initially assumed to be a straying NATO aircraft, the contact defied standard interception protocols, veering sharply on vectors that exceeded the known turn radius of any British or American jet then in service. The incident was logged in the squadron's Form 540 operational record book, but classified at the most secret level within 24 hours. That classification bore a code name, Operation Black Picket. Declassified Ministry of Defense files, Air 20/12237, reveal that this was not the first detection. Between November 1951 and March 1952, ground-based radar stations at RAF Bawdsey and Trimingham logged 17 similar returns, each appearing over the central North Sea before fading inland, usually toward the Yorkshire coast. The primary narrative at the time cited weather anomalies, or inversion layers, corrupting the returns. But the tracking data tells another story. The intrusions were consistently plotted to terminate near disused RAF airfields and munitions depots abandoned since 1945. The most persistent anomaly occurred on January 22, 1952, when three separate radar chains, Bawdsey, Stakston Wold, and Neatsted, simultaneously tracked a single object executing a sharp descent from 15,000 to 2,000 feet in under 40 seconds before leveling off. This performance matched nothing in operational NATO or Soviet inventories. Yet, in internal memos, Air Commodore Sir Leonard Bagnall dismissed the returns as inconsequential. A turning point came when cross-service intelligence meetings linked the radar signatures to a cache of technical papers seized from Piemont in May 1945. These papers, marked Geheime Kommandosake, described experimental Luftwaffe pulse drive prototypes, identified only as Gerät-Vierens 1ZB. Unlike conventional jet turbines, these designs theorized cyclical electromagnetic propulsion, an area the Allies were not actively pursuing in the early post-war years. Piemont engineers interrogated under Operation Surgeon reportedly admitted that at least 2 prototype craft were flown in late-stage tests over the Baltic in early 1945. Both were evacuated ahead of the Soviet advance. No further trace was found. However, newly unearthed RAF intelligence branch summaries from 1953 suggest those prototypes may have survived the war. One report notes the possible deployment of salvaged German research vehicles by unaligned actors, and warns of low-altitude nocturnal trials in North Sea theater. The identity of these unaligned actors is never explained, though one heavily redacted passage refers to Scandinavian intermediaries. Civilian witnesses bolster the mystery. On February 19, 1952, a trawler crew operating 60 miles east of Scarborough reported a dull, engine-less hum overhead, followed by a metallic, disc-like silhouette gliding against the overcast. The trawler's captain filed a statement with the Royal Navy's Eastern Command. The account was quietly transferred to Black Picket's files and removed from maritime incident logs. By March 1952, the activity peaked. RAF scrambled intercepts on 6 separate occasions, never achieving visual contact. In every instance, the objects faded from radar over land, often near abandoned wartime bunkers. An internal note from Wing Commander Alastair Green to Air Intelligence HQ states, "Suspect recovery of Piemont assets in progress. Recommend inland surveillance of decommissioned Luftwaffe research depots." This recommendation was never acted upon. Why the abrupt termination of the investigation? Black Picket's files show a sudden reduction in activity after April 1952, followed by an order from the Air Ministry to reclassify all related phenomena under Standard Meteorological Disturbance Protocol. Official histories omit the code name entirely. One unverified account from an RAF radar technician claims that on April 12, 1952, a successful interception occurred, though the result was never entered in the operational logs. The technician, stationed at RAF Patrington, recalled overhearing 2 flight crews discussing a visual confirm of a twin fuselage aircraft with no propellers, no visible jet exhaust. The description aligns loosely with Gerät-Vierens 1ZB design sketches recovered from Piemont. The ministry's archival trail goes cold until 1978, when an Air Defense Review Committee quietly noted possible historical incidents of advanced aerial incursions unaccounted for in Soviet inventories. No public release followed. What remains today are fragments, radar plots inconsistent with natural phenomena, technical diagrams from a dead regime's laboratories, and whispered testimonies from crews long retired. If the North Sea objects of 1952 were remnants of the Reich's pulse drive ambitions, their post-war handlers remain unidentified, their motives unclear. Yet the precision of their inland disappearances, always near decommissioned military infrastructure, suggests a purpose beyond testing. Whether that purpose was intelligence gathering, technology transfer, or simply proving the continued existence of a weapon thought lost in the ruins of Piemont, Operation Black Picket remains a sealed chapter in the Cold War's shadow theater. On April 17, 1946, British military intelligence catalogued a German-language transcript into the Allied Combined Interrogation Center archives at Bad Nendorf. The transcript, marked Level 3, not to be circulated, recorded the debriefing of a captured Abwehr operative identified only by the codename Lux. The prisoner had been detained near Leipzig while attempting to cross into the Soviet zone with forged identification papers and a radio set concealed in a false bottom satchel. Under questioning, Lux claimed to have been part of a small operational unit dispatched under Directive Eisenfaust, a plan he said originated in February 1945, months before the Reich's surrender. According to his account, Eisenfaust's mission objective was not sabotage against Allied forces, but the disruption of Soviet nuclear development. The unit, composed of 6 operatives, was selected from veteran Brandenburg Regiment personnel and disguised as Red Army engineers. They were equipped with forged work orders, Soviet-issue uniforms, and access to pre-war German supply caches buried along the Oder River. The interrogation transcript notes Lux's description of crossing the front lines in late March 1945 under cover of heavy artillery exchanges near Kustrin. Once inside Soviet-held territory, the unit made its way toward the vicinity of Sarov, then a closed military zone under NKVD control, and later the heart of the USSR's nuclear weapons program. He claimed their orders were to infiltrate logistical hubs supporting early research into uranite enrichment and high-flux pile construction, terms unusual for a field operative of his background. Official Soviet bomb development did not begin in earnest until later in 1945, yet Lux insisted his target area contained facilities already experimenting with fissile material refinement. This assertion, if true, would suggest Soviet atomic work was underway months before recorded history acknowledges. The Allies, particularly the British SIS, viewed the statement with suspicion. Interrogation notes remark on Lux's lucid technical familiarity inconsistent with standard aware operational scope. Nevertheless, supporting anomalies began to surface. Signals intercepts from April 1945, declassified decades later, reference unusual power consumption levels in certain Red Army-controlled industrial districts east of the Volga. The scale of this demand could not be attributed solely to conventional munitions production. Lux described sabotage plans involving the contamination of cooling systems with abrasive particulates to cause turbine and pump failure, as well as the destruction of key transformer stations. According to him, 2 members of the Eisenfaust unit successfully infiltrated a hydroelectric site believed to feed the research compound, planting delayed incendiary charges. He maintained that the operation was compromised when an NKVD patrol discovered one of the German caches near Murom, prompting a region-wide manhunt. Interrogators challenged Lux on the outcome, but he refused to give a definitive account. He hinted that at least part of the sabotage succeeded, causing a catastrophic systems outage in May 1945 that delayed operations at the site by months, perhaps a year. There are no surviving Soviet records confirming such an event. However, a post-war U.S. Atomic Energy Commission assessment noted unexplained equipment procurement delays in early Soviet nuclear development. The transcript also reveals that Lux feared pursuit, not from Soviet authorities, but from former comrades who considered Eisenfaust's mission a betrayal of post-surrender agreements made with certain Allied elements. This remark drew the attention of the CIC officers present, but follow-up questioning was cut short when Lux was abruptly transferred to an undisclosed facility. No further interrogation records exist in public archives. In 1957, a fragmentary Soviet counterintelligence report surfaced in a Warsaw Pact military history review. It detailed the capture and execution of 2 foreign diversionists in the Nizhny Novgorod region in spring 1945, describing uniforms with irregular stitching and tools of German origin hidden in Soviet supply crates. The report does not explicitly link them to nuclear work, but notes their possession of a German-language manual on high-voltage rectifiers, similar to those used in enrichment cascades. By the mid-1960s, Western analysts reviewing the Eisenfaust account began to suspect a deeper layer, that the mission may have been sanctioned, indirectly, by factions within the collapsing German military who hoped to deny advanced weapons to any post-war power, including the Soviet Union. This theory was bolstered by a discovery in the British National Archives, an SIS internal memo dated May 14, 1945, which stated, Asset, Fox, Lux, reports successful disruption in Volga district. Potentially advantageous to our emerging nuclear posture. The disappearance of Lux remains unexplained. Official British records list him as released to civilian status in September 1946, yet no civilian registration matches his description. Some researchers speculate he may have been absorbed into early Cold War intelligence networks, his operational knowledge making him valuable to both Western and Eastern services. Today, Directive Eisenfaust occupies a peculiar space in wartime historiography, a possibly fabricated tale from a self-serving operative, or a fragment of suppressed history pointing to a secret front in the race for the atom. In either case, the Oder River crossing described by looks, a handful of men moving under enemy colors toward a target that official records insist did not yet exist, remains one of the most intriguing shadows cast across the post-war intelligence landscape. On August 18, 1961, commercial diver Erik Mikkelsen was performing routine salvage work near the mouth of the Fjord, just southeast of Narvik, Norway. Visibility was poor, less than 3 meters, and the water temperature hovered near freezing. At a depth of 26 meters, Mikkelsen's lamp beam swept over a corroded steel container, partially lodged in silt. The object was roughly 1 meter in length, cylindrical, with a ceiling clasp still faintly stenciled in black, an eagle clutching a swastika, and beneath it, faint block letters reading Kriegsmarine Werft Kiel. Mikkelsen secured a lift bag, surfaced with the container, and brought it to the small pier used by his salvage company. A local harbor officer was summoned. Within 2 hours, 3 men in plain clothes arrived, identifying themselves as from the Norwegian Security Service. They took the container, signed no receipt, and advised Mikkelsen to treat the find as a matter of state security. He was later paid a recovery stipend in cash. The incident never entered local police or maritime records. Only through a chance discovery in 1984 did the matter resurface. While cataloging a private collection of Cold War-era maritime photographs in Bodo, historian Lars Henningsen found 3 small, underexposed images clearly showing the container on the pier. In the background, a man holds a section of degraded 35mm film, the lid already opened. The origin of the container, according to later testimony from one retired Norwegian intelligence officer, lay in Kriegsmarine archival discrepancies. Official German naval logs list U-1229 as sunk by Allied aircraft on August 20, 1944 in the North Atlantic, roughly 500 nautical miles south of Greenland. The U.S. Navy credited the kill to aircraft from USS Bogue. Yet an incomplete signal intercept from B-Dienst records, recovered in 1945, places U-1229 in the Norwegian Sea less than 72 hours before its reported sinking, headed toward the Arctic Circle under Glock priority orders. The recovered film reels, by all accounts, depicted tests of a large, ungainly vessel unlike any documented Kriegsmarine class. Witnesses who viewed the footage, only a handful, according to surviving sources, describe a turbine-driven craft with a blunt prow and a flat, barge-like stern, maneuvering in icy waters with minimal wake. Frames show what appears to be a latticework superstructure atop the deck, braced against waves, and a series of unusual exhaust stacks positioned laterally rather than aft. No technical logs for such a vessel exist in known naval archives. However, scattered references in wartime engineering correspondence mention Projekt Silesia, a classified program to develop long-range, submersible cargo carriers intended for polar routes. Allied intelligence assumed the program was abandoned in early 1944 due to resource shortages. If the Narvik footage was genuine, it suggested Silesia progressed far enough for open water trials. Within Norwegian classified files, declassified in part during the 1990s, one memorandum stands out. Dated August 21, 1961, it details the immediate handover of recovered naval canister number 4 to foreign liaison officers stationed at the U.S. Embassy in Oslo. The item was marked to be conveyed via secure diplomatic pouch, bypassing normal customs and chain of custody procedures. From that point onward, no record of the container or its contents appears in Norwegian archives. Soviet naval intelligence, for its part, seemed aware of something unusual in the fjord. A KGB maritime situation report from September 1961, obtained by Norwegian defectors in the 1970s, notes unconfirmed retrieval of enemy asset from Narvik region by NATO partners, likely Kriegsmarine origin, priority assessment, possible Arctic-capable platform data. The report recommended increased trawler patrols along Norwegian coastal approaches. The U-1229 connection deepens when cross-referencing Allied submarine hunting records. Anomalies in the USS Bogue's action report include a misaligned timeline between sonar contact and weapons deployment, as well as an absence of recovered wreckage, unusual for a confirmed kill at close range. Some naval historians speculate that the sinking report may have been a deliberate cover to conceal the U-boat's diversion to a classified transfer mission in northern waters. By the late 1970s, several maritime researchers tried to locate the Narvik container's recovery site. Side-scan sonar surveys of Fjord revealed debris fields consistent with wartime dumping, including twisted steel frames and sections of riveted hull plating. None, however, matched the unique container dimensions described in the 1961 photographs. The only surviving technical clue lies in an obscure Bundesarchiv file labeled Versuchsfahrten, Arktis 1944. Among weather logs and ice charts is a half-page drawing of a craft strikingly similar to eyewitness descriptions from the recovered film: broad beam, shallow draft, lateral exhausts. Notably, the drawing is stamped Nur für Glockbefehl, indicating the highest priority directive under Kriegsmarine secrecy protocols. To this day, the ultimate fate of the container, the film reels, and the vessel they depicted remains unresolved. Whether U-1229 was ever sunk in the Atlantic, or instead delivered an unrecorded prototype to Arctic waters before vanishing from the war's official narrative, is a question left to speculation, and to a small set of photographs that should not, by all logic, exist at all. In late January 1946, a small detachment from the U.S. Army's 97th Infantry Division was conducting post-war inventory sweeps through Lower Silesia, Poland. The region had been a battlefield corridor only months earlier, but was now under Soviet administrative control per the Potsdam Agreement. For reasons never made clear in official records, the Americans, accompanied by at least 2 Soviet officers, visited a ruined munitions depot on the outskirts of Strzeżegiem. What survives of this event is a single black-and-white photograph recovered in 1963 from the attic of a burned farmhouse in the nearby village of Modliso. The image shows 4 men, 2 wearing U.S. Army M43 field jackets, 2 in Red Army winter tunics, standing in front of a collapsed storage shed. Behind them, partially obscured by camouflage netting, is a cylindrical object nearly 3 meters in diameter, mounted horizontally on a skeletal carriage. The object's surface bears faint geometric etching, and a hatch-like aperture is visible on one end. Stamped on the photograph's reverse in faint ink is AGC 94, eyes only. No official U.S. Army photographic archive contains this reference, and AGC does not match any known Signal Corps cataloging prefix. The image entered private hands after the war, passed quietly between collectors before its 1963 rediscovery. Within days of surfacing, it was acquired by an unnamed American technical liaison, and has not been publicly seen since. Only a low-resolution copy, smuggled out by a Polish archivist in the 1970s, remains. Theories about the object in the photograph link it to Projekt Sonnenmaschine, an alleged late-war German energy weapon program. References to Sonnenmaschine appear sporadically in fragmented Reich Ministry for Armaments correspondence, often tied to the Forschungsstelle Ohrdruf research site in Thuringia. Surviving papers describe high-intensity photonic discharge and rotor-based field modulation, suggesting an attempt to weaponize concentrated light or energy beams. Allied intelligence post-war showed little public interest in such technology, though closed-door NATO briefings in the 1950s list directed energy applications among research priorities. Polish post-war security files include testimony from displaced villagers who claimed that in April 1945, German engineers moved a great metal drum into the Strzeżegiem depot under heavy guard. Witnesses described floodlights operating at night and intermittent mechanical noise from within the depot until early May, when all activity ceased. Days later, Soviet trucks arrived, removing cargo under tarpaulins. If the Americans were present during this removal, their cooperation with Soviet officers would have been unusual but not unprecedented in the chaotic early months of occupation. In 1992, after partial declassification of Soviet military archives, a single logbook entry from the 8th Guards Army emerged. Dated February 3, 1946, it records a joint Anglo-American technical survey at a former Wehrmacht facility in Lower Silesia. The entry notes the recovery of device SM-1, but offers no description beyond cylindrical, metallic, high weight density. No photographs accompany the entry, and SM-1 appears nowhere else in Soviet archival material available to researchers. A more controversial source is a debriefing transcript of a former NKVD logistics officer, recorded in East Berlin in 1967. The officer claimed that SM-1 was transported by rail to a closed site near Arzamas, USSR, under the pretext of agricultural machinery imports. He stated that Western personnel were granted brief access to examine the device before transfer, implying a negotiated exchange of technical data. Whether such cooperation actually occurred remains speculative, as it conflicts with the adversarial post-war narrative. Western archival anomalies further complicate matters. In the U.S. National Archives, a gap exists in the 97th Infantry Division's unit journal for January-February 1946. Adjacent entries make vague references to combined field visit and photographic documentation filed under separate custody. Cross-referencing with Quartermaster Corps transportation logs reveals the dispatch of one oversized, hazardous cargo crate from Bremerhaven to an undisclosed stateside facility on February 14, 1946. The bill of lading lists the sender only as AGC 94. The fate of the original photograph and the object it depicts remains unknown. Oral histories collected from surviving veterans suggest that Sonnenmaschine may have been dismantled shortly after its recovery, with core components repurposed into classified post-war projects. If so, its destruction was thorough, no surviving technical fragments have been identified, and no documented post-war testing sites match the described form factor. Yet the persistent reappearance of the AGC-94 designation, in obscure requisition slips, in misfiled photographic indexes, in freight logs from Bremerhaven, hints at a shadow chain of custody. Whether the object was truly a functional weapon, a prototype, or merely a technological curiosity seized in the closing chaos of the war, its erasure from both Western and Eastern records speaks to an agreement between rivals. Whatever was found in that ruined depot, neither side wanted the public to know. The last page was never torn out, it was buried, deep under the concrete of new wars and new lies. Somewhere, in a locked cabinet no one will admit exists, the evidence waits, a grainy image, a forgotten blueprint, a dead man's coded confession. History doesn't forget, it only hides, and the things it hides are the ones that can still kill.